Hey, folks, Roland Unfiltered for Tuesday, December 4th, 2018. I am broadcasting from St. Petersburg, Florida. It is the Founders Day, 112th Founders Day for my fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha. And so we're going to be talking to a whole bunch of alphas on my panel today. Got Greg Carr, Sam Fullwood, as well as Lon Walls. We'll also talk with Congressman Bobby Scott. Of course, he is about his new role as the chair of the Education and Workforce Committee, also an alpha man. Betsy DeVos, you better get ready because you are going to feel the heat from, we say, ice cold, from Congressman Bobby Scott. Also, we'll talk about the anti-democratic power grab by Republican Wisconsin legislators. It is happening right now in the state capitol in Madison. We'll talk live with one of two African-American state senators, LaTanya Johnson. Also, more details are emerging on the GOP-led election fraud in North Carolina. New witness comes forward to describe the scheme, and the new Democratic majority in the U.S. House will not seat the winner until that investigation is complete. Also, former President George H.W. Bush continues to lie in state at the U.S. Capitol. We'll talk about his legacy with Fred McClure, former special assistant to President Bush and a native Texan. Also, Lee Saunders, president of AFSCME. He'll have a tribute to all the great alpha civil rights leaders. And also, former NFL great Marcellus Wiley is on another team in a desperate need of a quarterback, not signing Colin Kaepernick. His new book is called Never Shut Up, and he will join us. Also, folks, another crazy white woman can't mind her own damn business in a store. She goes after 3 black women for talking in a Target. Yeah, talking. It's time to bring the funk. I'm Roland Martin Unfiltered. Let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the miss, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time, and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, y'all. It's Roland Martin, yeah. Rolling with Roland now. He's funky, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now. Martin.
All right, folks, I'm broadcasting live from St. Petersburg, Florida. Well, I will be speaking to the Poynter Institute for Media Studies as a result of my role as the Vice President Digital for the National Association of Black Journalists. And so I'll be here today and tomorrow broadcasting the show. I'll be broadcasting from New York City on Thursday and Friday. Today is also December 4th. It is Founders Day for my fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha. That's why you see me wearing the black and old gold. And so we got a great panel lined up for you as well of several alpha men. So certainly glad to have them in the house. So folks, there are a number of issues that we want to get to today that deals with what's going on in our country. And first and foremost, we'll talk about, of course, what's happening with Republicans in Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, the kind of shenanigans they are trying to pull, which is grossly democratic. So we'll talk about that. And so you don't want to miss that conversation. But also, of course, the Capitol Hill is preparing for Democrats to take control of the U.S. House come January. Now, leadership has already been decided. Nancy Pelosi, she, of course, will be the Speaker of the House. Steny Hoyer of Maryland will be the Majority Leader. Of course, Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina is going to be the Whip. But also, African Americans are going to be leading critical committees, and one of those committees deal with the issue of education and the workforce. And one of the folks who has been a leader in that area is Virginia Congressman Bobby Scott from the 3rd Congressional District there, one of my fellow Alva brothers. He joins us right now. He's going to be the incoming chair of the Committee on Education and the Workforce. And Congressman Scott, how you doing?
Doing fine, Brother Martin. How you doing? Happy 112th.
Yes, indeed. Glad to have you on the show today. Obviously, education is a critical issue. You've always been one who has been focused on that. And we have seen the kind of leadership Betsy DeVos has had in Secretary of Education. Many are highly critical of what she has been doing as Secretary of Education, especially when it comes to these for-profit universities. The Obama administration went after them, saying they were not helping students, and they were frankly just taking their money what is the first task you have on hand leading that committee to address the issues in the Department of Education?
Well, the first thing that we have to recognize is that Alpha Phi Alpha had it right a long time ago, almost 100 years ago. We established a program, Go to High School, Go to College, which encourages young people to go to high school and then follow through by going to college. We know that 2/3 of the jobs of the future will require some education and training past the high school level. A high school diploma isn't enough. It's not necessarily a 4-year college, but some education and training past the high school level. So we have to prepare young people to get at least a high school diploma to start off with, and then offer other workforce training or higher education. The access to higher education is important. The Republicans reported a bill out of committee that actually cut $15 billion out of student aid, made student loans harder to pay off, and removed many of the oversight regulations for the for-profit sector, as you've noted, which has been problematic. There are some good for-profit colleges that provide a good product, but most of them, unfortunately, are problematic. They charge too much and provide too little actual education. So oversight of the for-profit sector will be one of the things that we'll be looking at. But equity in education is extremely important. Make sure everybody fulfills the promise in Brown v. Board of Education. It said that it is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if denied the opportunity of an education. Such an opportunity is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms. We fund education with the real estate tax, so it's obviously going to be problematic in terms of equal opportunity, and we need to make sure that the federal government, under Title I and other funding mechanisms, make sure that everybody has access to a quality K through 12 education and the opportunity to go to college after that.
All right, then. And last question for you, sir. That is the First Step Act. The Senate is not acting. Do you expect Mitch McConnell to hold this thing up and allow that bill to die before Congress goes home for a Christmas recess?
Well, I'm not sure. There's some provisions I have a problem with. One of the things that you like to do is get a CBO analysis to find out what's actually in the bill. There are some provisions which actually increase mass incarceration, but it's hard to say how much. There's some very good provisions in it. The Fair Sentencing Act, which reduced the 101 crack powder cocaine disparity, is made retroactive. Many of us thought it was retroactive when he passed it, but the courts ruled otherwise. There are provisions that reduce many mandatory minimums. There are more services provided in the prisons, which would reduce recidivism, give people opportunities. There's a lot of good in it. I frankly would prefer a more regular process. This thing hasn't gone through committees in the House, and we need to take a more formal, detailed look at the bill. But my sense right now is it's got a lot more good than bad in it, and hopefully they'll take it up. And if not, this isn't the end of the world. We can consider it in the regular process with a Democratic majority in the House, go through, have hearings, explain what's in the bill, why the provisions are in the bill. We might be able to improve it. So I think the world won't come to an end if McConnell stonewalls it, as he has a lot of good legislation. We'll just have to see what they do. All right, Congressman Bobby Scott. There is legislation over in the Senate that I think ought to pass, and that's the reauthorization of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. It has many very good provisions, and it needs to pass. There are a couple of details that a couple of senators have problems with. I hope they just get together and pass it. We passed it 3 years ago. We passed it last year. It's been sitting over in the Senate and hadn't been able to budge. There are only 2 or 3 senators that would not vote for it if they called it up for a vote. So reauthorizing the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act ought to be a high priority, and if they don't get around to it this time, it will be one of the first things we do in next year. Oh, by the way, we're changing the name. It won't be Education in the Workforce. It will be Education and Labor, the same name it had when Adam Clayton Powell and Gus Hawkins chaired that committee.
All right, Congressman Bobby Scott of Virginia. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, folks, tomorrow's going to be National Mourning Day for President George H.W. Bush. He remains lying in state at the Capitol. Of course, numerous folks have been going through the Capitol, paying their respects. One of the folks who has been involved in the planning of the state funeral is Fred McClure, who served as special assistant to President George H.W. Bush. He's a native Texan, first black student body president at my alma mater, Texas A&M University. Fred, glad to have you on the show.
Roland, good to be here. Thanks a bunch.
First and foremost, your thoughts on the passing of President Bush, someone you have known for a quite long time, working also at the Bush Library there in Texas A&M.
Yes, I've had the privilege of knowing the president for 39 years, and actually 10 years after I met him, I joined the White House staff as Assistant for Legislative Affairs and ran the congressional operation for the president for the first 3 years of his term. I returned to Texas more recently in 2012 and was the CEO of the George Bush Presidential Library Foundation.
Well, you talk about his legacy. For you, 39 years, obviously a long time, very personal connection there. But what do you consider to be the greatest triumphs of his 4 years as president?
Well, you know, one of the interesting things, you're talking with Congressman Scott there, and with the change in hands of the House of Representatives, when President Bush was president, neither the House nor the Senate was a Republican-led, and so it required us in everything that we tried to do to make sure that we approached it in a way which had some bipartisan flavor associated with it. Otherwise, we couldn't get anything done, whether that was the American with Disabilities Act, whether that was the first reauthorization of the Clean Air Act, and other pieces of legislation on the domestic front. Likewise, the president has a pretty strong legacy, I believe, on the foreign affairs front. He did some things that were probably against conventional wisdom, which probably were politically uncomfortable, and those who might thought it was the wrong thing to do. For example, with Saddam Hussein, he didn't go trudging into Iraq. We just got him out of Kuwait, which is what the president's objective was. And of course, he presided over the reunification of Germany and the change in the Soviet Union. So those were kinds of things that took place during his 4 years, which I think will have a lasting impact. One of the biggest things in terms of going against conventional wisdom, I think, was when he reneged on his No New Taxes pledge. He did so because it was the right thing to do to get the budget deal that we needed to get to keep the economy churning back during the early 1990s. So I think ultimately, as we look back upon his legacy of service, from being a congressman to being ambassador to the UN, to envoy to China, and of course 8 years as vice president and president, that with the passage of time, as I think has been demonstrated over the last few days, that there is another look at the way in which he approached governing and what he did in terms of dealing with folks on the other side of the aisle as well as those people in his own political party.
Yeah, obviously, when a president or a member of Congress, a U.S. senator passes, folks reflect and mourn in different ways, but also there are others who say there should be a very clear look at legacy. We had a conversation yesterday where folks talked about, obviously, the things that you mentioned. Also, we had Louis Sullivan on, Armstrong Williams on. We also had folks who talked about the issue of the appointment of Clarence Thomas, the Willie Horton ad during the campaign as well. How would you describe his legacy specifically about African Americans, to African Americans?
Well, I had the responsibility for getting Clarence Thomas confirmed as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court as a Legislative Affairs Assistant for the President. And after the President made his decision that Clarence was going to be his candidate, then my job was to make sure and get enough votes to accomplish that task, and we succeeded in doing it. And we had bipartisan support for his nomination. It wasn't a straight party line vote. And so that was what we tried to do when the President made the decision to choose Clarence Thomas as the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. It comes with the territory. A president is generally expected to nominate someone who he feels or she feels, as the case may be, does what he wants on the court in terms of the interpretation of the Constitution and how they would serve as a justice, because they get to serve an awful long time. President also nominated David Souter, which was his first nominee to the Supreme Court. So those, in a 4-year time frame, the president was lucky enough to have those two opportunities to affect the Supreme Court of the United States.
Last question. Obviously, you have a national day of mourning tomorrow. So many people are also talking about how he led in terms of stature as well, and what that is going to mean moving forward in terms of how we look at presidents, in terms of, and when you look at the partisan rancor now, clearly I don't think you can even remotely compare what took place in 1980 to 1992 to what's happening today. I mean, there's a stark contrast to how divided the nation is. I
think the nation comes together at times like this because of people who have given of themselves to serve as president of the United States. There have only been like 45 of them. If you reflect back to 2006 when President Ford passed away, we had a similar moment where people came together and reflected favorably from both sides of the aisle upon President Ford and his contributions, either as a congressman for a short time as vice president and ultimately for his one term as president. Shortly after President Ford passed away, and he was buried the latter part of December of that year, Congress went back to its normal rancor here in Washington, D.C., and the same back and forth between the White House and Capitol Hill emerged once again. One of the advantages I had in 1992 with Clarence Thomas, or 91 with Clarence Thomas, was that there wasn't just a whole lot of different mechanisms available to transmit news and to have people. We had like 3 networks and some little thing called CNN. That was it. And those are the kinds of issues that I had to worry about. We didn't have a 24/7 news cycle. We didn't have everybody with a cell phone who has the ability to be their own producer, director, and publisher, as the case may be. So the times have changed dramatically, and I think what's happened is that our edges have hardened. And as those edges have hardened, the divide in the middle has gotten larger and larger. So the question always becomes, who's going to be the candidate that comes to the forefront and gives of him or herself in such a fashion that they can garner the interest of enough of the American people. President Obama did it beautifully, and the same thing happened, I think, when we got defeated by President Clinton. But as you look back over the lives of those individuals, I think you will see that upon reflection, most of them tried to do the best job that they could do for the benefit of the American people.
All right, Fred McClure.
Let me add one other thing, Roland. I was telling these guys earlier when we were back in the green room, my dad was an alpha at Prairie View A&M University.
Yes, sir. See, there you go. See, you got to work that in.
I got to work that in. It's birthday time. It's birthday time.
All right, then. Fred McClure, always good to see you.
Thanks, buddy.
And we'll be sure to catch up when we're back in Texas.
Thank you. Be safe in your travels.
All right, thanks a bunch. Folks, let's talk about what's happening. We talk about partisan rancor. Let's go to what's happening in Michigan, Wisconsin, and North Carolina. That is, of course, Republicans suffered big defeats in all 3 of those states on November 6th. And so they're trying to use the lame duck to, in a sense, reverse what the voters actually decided. As we speak in Wisconsin, there's a major power grab when it comes to rolling back the rights of folks to vote, but also the governor and the attorney general in Wisconsin. Votes are planned today in that state to shift power to the GOP-controlled legislature and take it away from the incoming Democratic governor, Tony Evers, and the incoming Democratic attorney general, Josh Call. Not only that, Republicans in Wisconsin also want to slice early voting. Not any real reason, because they saw the result of what happened by them losing. Also, there have been massive protests in Wisconsin as well. And not only that, in 2020, as we discussed yesterday, they even want to change the election date in 2020 for a Supreme Court judge because now that's been abandoned for now. But again, they're trying to bring the thing back up. Now, Wisconsin, solidly Republicans controlling the legislature. In the Senate, it's 18-15, so the Republicans can't lose that many votes. But, folks, it is stunning when you look at what is happening right there. And that they lost the popular vote for the state assembly, but because of gerrymandering, they are still in control. Look at this chart right here. Republicans won 45% of the vote, yet they won 64% of the seats. Think about that. 45% of the votes, they won 64% of the seats. Democrats won 53% of the vote, but they won only 36% of the seats. And of course, this is all due to gerrymandering that, of course, and the lawsuit involving gerrymandering is in Wisconsin, went to the Supreme Court, but they kicked it back to a lower court. The Supreme Court still needs to rule on that. I want to bring in my panel right now, Dr. Greg Carr, Chair of the Department of Afro-American Studies at Howard University, Sam Fullwood, who's a columnist with Think Progress, and Lon Walsh, President and CEO of Walsh Communications. Of course, all three alpha men. Gentlemen, glad to have you on Founders Day.
Happy birthday to be here.
Right on. Happy Founders Day.
Sam, I want to start with you because when we talk about what's happening here, the gerrymandering, this is a perfect example. Republicans controlled everything there in Wisconsin, and they lost at the ballot box. Now they want to tell the voters, we're going to screw you by changing everything and limiting the power of the governor you elected.
Roland, you sound surprised that this is happening, and
no, not surprised.
I think this is par for the course. I'm from North Carolina, and immediately after the Democrats took over the State House, that is the governorship, when was it, 2 years ago, the Republicans in North Carolina, which had a supermajority in the legislature, did exactly the same thing that they're doing in Wisconsin. That was a test case for how you run roughshod over the will of the people. And because of the same kind of gerrymandering, your chart exhibited it perfectly. I'm not surprised at all. They're considering doing the exact same thing in Michigan. And I have a sense that they'll succeed at it simply because there hasn't been the level of outrage and backlash against. There's no way to punish them for doing this kind of gerrymandering and then forcing their undemocratic rule on people.
But Greg Carr, Sam talked about North Carolina, and his was interesting. For 4 years on News One Now and TV One, I was constantly covering what was happening in North Carolina. Did so on the Tom Joyner Morning Show, have done so on Roland Martin Unfiltered. And now all of a sudden, national media is paying attention in a big way to what's happening in Wisconsin and Michigan. But to Sam's point, this is exactly what happened in North Carolina. And frankly, national media was ignoring what Republicans were doing there and what they're still doing. And it was an absolute petri dish for what Republicans are now doing all across the country, saying, hey, if they did it and it worked there, we can try it in our state.
Absolutely. Again, happy birthday. And this is a reason why this show and black news media is important. There's a veneer of civility in American politics that makes people think somehow that naked power grabs like this are somehow countervailant to the American political mind. And that's simply not the case. What we're watching is the only card the Republicans have left if they're going to maintain this white supremacist approach. They're going to retreat and pull power almost like an inner chamber in a castle and build a safety room to rule from. So what you see, I mean, even in Michigan, they're attempting now to strip the governor and the attorney general of the ability to intervene in federal cases. Why? And with all due respect to Brother McClure, the man that he helped shepherd through the Supreme Court with the help of Joe Biden, which disqualifies him forever as far as I'm concerned from being president of the United States, will be on a majority side if these cases, trying to bring these cases to court, make it through the federal courts, they are counting on a stacked judiciary to support these naked power grabs, this contravention of the will of the majority, not only in Michigan, as we heard Sam said, not only in Wisconsin, not only in North Carolina, but anywhere else where demographics and time are against them. They're just going to rule this country if they can from a minority position from now until we can stop them.
And Lon, what you're dealing with here, this is exactly why people have to stop acting as if local elections don't matter. We are seeing an increasing number of African Americans who are returning to the South, so we're reverse migration, and they're moving to North Carolina. They're moving to Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Florida, Louisiana, Arkansas, South Carolina. And what's happening is, and interesting, I saw this during the election, where I had a sister who moved from California to Georgia, and she said, man, for the first time, I'm now voting, and it's a totally different reaction than when I was voting in California, because they're seeing the results of Republicans controlling both houses and how they're taking naked power and abusing the democratic process.
Well, Roland, it's interesting you bring that up because I had a conversation with Lee Saunders, who you'll be talking to, or he'll have some comments. And going back to Wisconsin, Janus versus AFSCME, really, according to all records, AFSCME's problem with Janus and with the administration start in Wisconsin. And going back to your point, all politics is local. People need to start paying attention to that because that could spread. I mean, you could have other issues. It's not just black people. We're talking about union folks. We're talking about people who are basically disenfranchised, and they're not just black folks. So there's a problem. I was actually in Florida right before the election, and I was amazed at the turnouts, and yet and still you saw the results, and you're scratching your head saying, what happened? You know, what happened? You had folks, mob scenes at the polls. I mean, the turnout was tremendous, yet and still you look at the end, the final result is something you can't believe. And so all politics is local, and I think it's important that we look at all these elections not just from a national perspective, the president locally, going down to the mayors, city councils, those kind of things. They're important. They're extremely important.
I want to make a point here, Roland, if I can, about local elections. One of the things that I think that has happened over the last 15 years is that Republicans have eviscerated public confidence in believing that elections matter.
Exactly.
And so what you have is a situation where the local contest, the mayor, the city council, the school boards, in those races, that's where you, one, groom people for higher office, but also that's where the decisions that are made are the most valuable to local citizens. The problem that we have is that people believe that their vote doesn't matter. The only thing that they get excited about is the president every 4 years, especially if there's someone that's attractive to be in it. And so you lose the energy to be able to have real substantial change. The only thing that the president really has any control over is the judiciary now, the Supreme Court. It's at the local level, the governors and the city councils, where the decisions that really affect people are most valuable.
But here's the other piece that's important again, and we saw this in the Mike Espy race. He lost by 68,000 votes. You had about 400,000 black people who didn't vote at all. And the point that is critically important is that we can't afford, as black people, to vote like everybody else. We can't afford to be voting at 45 and 50% of our capacity. We have to be voting at 70, 75, 80, 85% turnout. And so what this is going to require a different type of grassroots focus that doesn't wait until 3 or 6 months out. It's going to be like, for instance, there are going to be elections next year, but people are focusing on 2020. Voter mobilization, education must be happening right now to prepare folks for that, because if we are turning out at 70, 75%, and I made this point, if Miami-Dade County voted at 70% turnout, Andrew Gillum is governor-elect. If black folks voted at 70% of their numbers in Mississippi, Mike Espy is the United States Senator. And so we literally, Reverend Jackson talks about this all the time, we literally have the power to change elections, but we have to be thinking not the percentage of black votes, but in terms of total, but the percentage of the turnout of black folks.
I'd like to make a point on this. Going back to Florida, as you know, Amendment 4 is going to allow 1.4 million returning citizens to vote. Now, to your point, we obviously need to pay attention to those folks because that's a potential voting block that can make a big difference. And I think, we have to start thinking, like you said, ahead. It's also about education. People don't know some of these offices, like the Secretary of State of Georgia. Nobody knew anything what it was about till the guy stole the election. Then it's, oh, what is this? So we have to educate ourselves about these positions in addition to, like you said, mobilizing early. Let's not wait until the end of 2019 to think about 2020. We need to start doing it now.
Well, let's talk about North Carolina, of course, where election fraud is taking place. Republican Mark Harris faced Democrat Dan McCready. Harris is leading by 905 votes, but we now know that was a massive scheme to basically discount absentee ballots. Here's how it worked. They would visit the home of absentee ballot requester, ask for an absentee ballot. and promised to return it to election officials. They would either fill in Harris's name or discard if they voted for McCready. Now, they seem to target rural African Americans. Now, here's what's amazing. 19% of the people in this particular county are Republicans who requested absentee ballots. But the Republican won 61% of the absentee ballot. Okay, let me explain that again. 19% of the people who requested absentee ballots were Republicans, and the Republican, Harris, won 61% of all absentee ballots. The State Board of Elections has 6 affidavits from people who had their ballots picked up. The man allegedly running the scam, working for the Harris campaign, is a convicted felon who faced jail time for fraud and perjury. Over the last 20 years, he has been paid by at least 9 candidates, all for get out the vote work. I thought they were so focused on voter ID. In addition, North Carolina GOP, they tried to rush through a law that would require, get this folks, every county elections board in the state to be chaired by a Republican in election years. Sam Fullwood, you're from there. Again, I keep saying it, Republicans in North Carolina, they would make Southern Dixiecrats from Mississippi and Alabama in the 50s and 60s proud of what they're doing.
The problem that you have in North Carolina is that you have this supermajority in the legislature, and up until a couple of years ago, you had a Republican governor. And, you know, that whole saying about absolute power corrupting absolutely, that's exactly what you have in the state, in the good old Tar Heel state. Those good old boys down there, recognizing, as you mentioned earlier, that their power one day is not going to be what it is today. And they're building in all of these systems to be able to protect their hegemony over the electorate. I'm really confused about this voter scandal in North Carolina. I'm confused because I don't know how you unravel this. The only possible solution is to have another election, and and
here's the piece: the elections board has the authority, Greg, to actually do that, and they can call for another election. It is clearly spelled out.
Well, to Sam's earlier point, if they don't call for a new election, how does that undermine, again, the citizens' faith in democracy? Now, I mean, we could take it back to the days of our frat brother Charles Hamilton Houston, who was arguing before a deeply racist federal bench, or his student, our frat brother Thurgood Marshall. The arguments that they made to get Brown done, to do voting rights, Baker versus Carr, and Gamillion versus Lightfoot, those cases were argued before a federal judiciary that still had to maintain the rule of law for people to have faith in it, even though there were many racist undertones. Let's come back to where we are today. If they don't call for another election uncovering this fraud, if they continue this deep overreach, they are counting with this white supremacist move. This is why, for example, Mitch McConnell won't bring anything up, because he doesn't have to. They are counting on stacking the federal judiciary in such a way so that this thing can receive the legitimacy of constitutional approval. And if they do that, now we're in trouble. Only last thing I'd say is this. At the state level, as you say, local elections matter. There's a Secretary of State election in Georgia. We just heard Lon say it. They are voting now for the person, if they vote and elect a Democrat, which is what you said, we got to get this black turnout up. They can do something to begin to dismantle what Brian Kemp did. But they've got to vote. And in Florida, where we lost that election, this new racist governor gets 3 picks to the Florida Supreme Court. You're not going to see African Americans on that Supreme Court. Local elections matter in part because the federal judiciary for the foreseeable future is going to be stacked with people who are not interpreting the Constitution as this kind of transcendent document, but one to preserve white supremacy. It's going to be the state Supreme Courts. It's going to be the local courts that matter, and those are elected positions.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, hold tight 1 second. I want to bring a message to one of our partners, and that is, folks, we guys want you to write this website down. It's marijuanastock.org. Now, I'm going to tell you why. As we transition into the holiday season, this is the time, of course, when we start thinking about giving and sharing. Sometimes the best gift that you can give someone is an opportunity that could potentially change their lives financially. That's why our friends at Transatlantic Real Estate have created an investment opportunity for the everyday investor. It involves legal marijuana and crowdfunding. Now, look, black folks have been impacted by marijuana in a negative way. Now, the issue is, It is legal in so many areas. It is one of the fastest growing industries in the country. Yeah, and we also know that crowdfunding makes it easy to be an early investor of an opportunity. It's a no-brainer. But it also gets even better. Transatlantic real estate is different, and they have a business model that is simple to understand. They buy land that supports marijuana grow operations and lease it to licensed, high-paying tenants. Now, here's the piece. You're investing in a landlord of a licensed marijuana farm in a high-growth market. And for a limited time, you can invest as little as $300 up to $10,000 before the company goes public. And here's some more good news. They have recently extended the offer, which means you still have time if you take action now. Now, keep in mind, you must complete and confirm your application to participate. So be sure to complete the process. And don't spend all of your money over the holidays and end up with empty pockets. Instead, get a return on your investment. You could also consider making an investment for someone special. How's that for a holiday gift? I think it's a good idea. Now, to get started, go to marijuanastock.org and marijuanastock.org for you to get in the game. And keep in mind, like as I said, this is a multi-billion-dollar business, and we want African Americans to be part of this as opposed to ignoring the opportunity. So marijuanastock.org. So we certainly want to thank our partners for making it possible to have, of course, Roland Martin Unfiltered. All right, folks, so we're going to take a break, and we're going to now focus on, of course, our HBCU Giving Day. Roll it, folks.
Local.
Man.
But you guys, you had a show about a week or two
Hatred.
talking about education.
So much never failed to destroy the man who hated. Writer and activist James Baldwin.
HBCU Giving Day. We, of course, focusing on University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. The founded in 1873, notable alumni, Smokey Norfolk, Taryn Armstead, Danny Davis, Congressman Danny Davis, and Don Zimmerman. Of course, if you want to support UAPB, please go to uapb.edu. Folks, Roland Martin Unfiltered is made possible by our great partners, and one of them is AFSCME, AFSCME, American Federation of County and State Municipal Employees, and we appreciate all that they do. Lee Saunders, he is the leader of AFSCME. He's a fellow Alpha man as well. And so we reached out to Lee, and on this Founders Day, we wanted to hear from him, reflecting on the meaning of being an Alpha and also the work brothers have been doing when it comes to civil rights. Here's Lee Saunders of AFSCME.
Thank you, Roland, and happy Founders Day to my Alpha brothers, all men of distinction. I crossed the burning sands as an undergraduate at Ohio University in 1970, becoming a member of Phi Chapter. The ethic of brotherhood and the commitment to justice instilled in me as an Alpha are part of what drew me to the labor movement, and specifically to a union like AFSCME, whose members feel a calling to serve and strengthen their communities. Alpha men are committed to a set of core values: mentorship and leadership, integrity and selflessness, service and advocacy, social justice and the common good, civic engagement and political activism, lifting up our neighbors, and giving back to our communities. It's no accident that many of our greatest leaders and pioneers, so many of the most fearless warriors in the struggle for civil rights and workers' rights, were Alphas. It's like a who's who of Black history in America. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Justice Thurgood Marshall, Paul Robeson, Whitney Young, Joseph Lowery, Ambassador Andrew Young, Dick Gregory, and so many more, including my friend, the great Roland Martin. The work of these giants continues to sustain us. The ideals that drove them and drive all of us continue to be passed down to new generations of Alphas. Being men of distinction means pursuing excellence, not just to improve ourselves, but those around us, our fellow Americans, and all of humanity. That's been the Alpha story for 112 years now, and so it will be for the next 112 and more.
All right, right, folks. And again, we certainly thank the folks at AFSCME for being supporters of Roland Martin Unfiltered. And you can do the same, folks. You can go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com, join our Bring the Funk fan club. And we are the only show that's on every single day, speaking to the issues of African Americans. As you keep hearing me say, we've got to fund our freedom. And so we need you to support us with your dollars by joining our fan club. Of course, you can give any amount. You make this possible as we, of course, tell the story of African Americans in the only way that we can. That is unapologetic and unfiltered. So go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Now, y'all keep hearing me talk about these crazy-ass white women, and guess what? Now we have another crazy-ass white woman who just cannot mind her own damn business, this time at a Target in Tennessee. 3 black women were talking, and this white woman felt the need to check these sisters. You know how that went. Watch.
I said, Tara, try this on because this looks like something Eartha said. I don't want to be compared to Eartha Kitt because she had sex.
This is what you guys
That's
do.
what I'm asking. That's why I'm asking. What
this
did we
woman
say
any longer,
specifically?
please. I want us to stop engaging with this woman.
Let's stop. Let's have finish
Yes,
with the head.
let's stop engaging with her, please. Let's stop.
She can't hear.
Thank you.
That's very clear.
I understand you're an abuser.
Stop.
I understand you're abusive.
Stop
I understand
talking
you're
to
abusive and you make up lies on the spot. I understand.
I understand some.
Please stop talking to this lady.
I mean, her Yeah, we have a problem. Yes, ma'am. We were standing here talking, and I made a reference to Eartha Kitt. No,
I can't.
ma'am. I made a reference to Eartha Kitt, and my friend said, I don't want to be compared to Eartha Kitt because she had sex in the movie with. And then she said,
okay, I know you're trained on lying. I know you're trained liar.
Yeah.
I know you're trained liars.
Good job.
We are together.
You're perfect for the court system. You guys should all go to court.
But now we're perfect for the court system.
Because you're trained liars.
All right, I'm going to start with you, Lon. You in PR. Here's the deal. These companies, people like Target might need to put a sign up, crazy-ass white women. Don't bring that bullshit in our store.
I'm not going to. First of all, she's got NASA on it. I mean, somebody should talk about that, right? That's a big sign. NASA. Okay, number one. But definitely, I think corporations and I think stores have to do a better job now because everybody's paying attention. I mean, this is going on almost every other day. So I think from a corporate standpoint, a corporate responsibility standpoint, communications, we need to start looking at what we need to do to kind of prohibit this kind of activity. But it's a bad look for Target. There's no question about that.
Here's the deal, Sam. I'm telling you right now. Now, these sisters were real nice. And I'm telling you,
Roland,
one of these white folks going to get knocked out by somebody if they decide to just jump in their folks' conversation. I mean, I'm telling you, it's going to happen.
I'm a little confused. I'm confused about a lot of things. But was this woman an employee of Target or was she a customer?
She was a customer.
These 3 sisters were talking amongst themselves, and this white woman jumps in a conversation to check them.
Just a customer.
See?
Yeah.
There's a liability there that Target's going to have when something jumps off, and it's going to be in Target. I don't know what it's going to happen, Roland. I hope you have the camera there when it happens. It's going to happen.
Greg, hashtag team whip that ass will be showing up. I'm telling you.
Roland, brother, maybe NASA means not a safe activity. They should give them shirts to every white person. But we're laughing, but here's the point. Here's the underlying issue that's very scary. You notice how quickly she moves to say, I'm going to call the law. This is perfect for court. You're trained liars. And this goes back to the previous segments, these white supremacists, as their demographics shrink, are going to look to the courts as the place for last refuge. And so any white person, if we look at the history of America, any white person is a deputy officer of the law. This is the paddle rollers, this is the slave catchers, this is the random people during Jim Crow. These are the people who stand aside when our people get murdered in malls and burnt in Alabama or Chicago. These are the people who feel like, because I'm white, I can always evoke the law and I can police you at any given moment. But, to the last thing to your point, when we do go off and they ignore that that's not a safe activity, keep messing with us, this country is going to have to decide whether or not it's going to be governed by the rule of law and humanity or it's going to degenerate into violence. Because you're right. Somebody going to get their ass whipped.
I'm telling you. And here's the piece. Again, Black folks trying to be calm. You heard the one sister say, we're not going to give her any time. But I'm telling you, you're just going to hop in my conversation, and then you're going to castigate me for something I wasn't even talking to you. I'm telling you right now, I keep warning all these crazy white women and white men. Y'all better mind your own damn business, because this is not the generation of black people who are going to kneel down and pray for y'all.
Roland, it never was the generation, brother. You made me pull out my history book, my Alpha history book today, brother. I pulled out Brother Charles Wesley. I'm reminded of Paul Robeson, who played football for Rutgers. Brother Paul Robeson, who was playing football when one of them white boys stepped and took all his fingernails off his hand. And on the next play, Robeson, who had been trying to be civil, lifted that white man over his head and was getting ready to break his spine when the coach said, blew the whistle and said, Robeson, you made the team. We will be pushed too far, brother. We've always been too far.
Absolutely. So I'm telling. So every time one of these videos happen, we gonna run it, and I'm keep warning these folks, because look, black folks are not playing this game where our car is barely in the walkway. We can't sell lemonade. Matter of fact, I saw somebody sent me a story today. What was it? A black woman was eating lunch somewhere, and they called the cops on her. Wait a minute. She was eating lunch in a university classroom.
Oh yeah, the student. Yeah. They even had a young lady who was sleeping in the student lounge, napping. We're in final exams now. Right. Kids do that, and the other students called the police on her because she had fallen asleep in the same lounge that they were sleeping in. Again, police while black, brother.
Yeah. I mean, these folks think this whole sense of entitlement has gone too far. It's basically they feel they're entitled, and we pull the sheets back, and we're just going to do anything, and it's our time. And that's the problem we're dealing with.
All right, so in a little bit, I'm going to be talking with Marcellus Wiley about his book in a little bit. But I just saw this story here, and so since Lon Walls, you, of course, the PR expert, I got to throw you this out. I rarely ever, we of course, we do entertainment stuff, but I saw this headline. It was pretty funny. Lauryn Hill praised for starting concert only 20 minutes late.
She's usually an hour or two late, so I guess that's an advantage.
If she comes at all.
If she comes at all.
But Lon, as a PR person, surely it ain't a good look when there's a news story because you getting praised for starting only 20 minutes late.
I mean, that's a problem. Her communications people and her management team, and we've got problems with these management teams that let these folks get away with murder, literally sometimes. They have to do a better job of policing these folks, because basically at some point in time it's going to affect their income.
No. The problem with that isn't with Lauryn Hill. It's with people who put down money knowing that she's going to show up 2 hours
exactly.
late. That's the problem.
Sure.
Yep.
So as long as she can get an audience and they can fill a hall, what does it matter to her?
But folks will stop doing that.
When folks stop going,
that's it.
She'll clean up her act.
And folks are not going to stop going. Unfortunately, that's just not going to happen. 20 minutes, it sets a record.
Well, I'm going to tell you right now, you ain't going to never, ever see me buy a ticket for a Lauryn Hill concert. Damn that. She going to have to text me when she on her way to the stage. not on her way to the venue. She going to text me personally saying I'm walking to the stage, because I'm sorry. I am not waiting. Look, the OJ's been in the business 60 years. Eddie Levert almost 80. He show up on time. Lauryn Hill, get your ass on that stage.
Come on, brother. And when another one of our frat brothers, the great Edward Kennedy Ellington, Duke Ellington, been in his grave. That brother had to take trains everywhere. He went and stayed in segregated hotels. And he never missed a date, and he was always on time. From Fargo, North Dakota to halfway around the world. That brother kept a band on the road during the Great Depression, and he was never late for a show.
Yeah, all I'm saying is you might just want to get there on time. That's all I'm saying. All right, I did see my guy Keenan, my digital guy, sent me this text. Remember the story of the black man who the FedEx driver where the white guy came at him yelling racial slurs, and the brother threw a punch, knocked him the hell out, and homeboy died. The brother, he is not going to be charged in that, because the prosecutor said that the man was acting very aggressively and that he was defending himself. No charges again will be filed against the guy, the brother who worked for FedEx, and hopefully FedEx is also Greg not going to fire the brother.
Well, Roland, to your point again, let's tie this again. Exactly what we've been saying. Local elections matter. Who appoints the local prosecutors? Who makes the decision not to charge? Go to the polls and vote, because in your city, if it had been a different city, thank God he was in the right place. Right. Because another prosecutor could very easily have tried to lock him up. And that's the problem. Yeah, we definitely hope that as well. FedEx should back him.
Now, Roland, to your point, the man took a swing at the brother first. You forget, he took a swing, and he also was in terrible shape. They said his health condition was already pretty bad. So if you feel like you're entitled and you're in the shape and you swing at somebody, well then, hey brother, it's all over. So he made the first strike, and that was it. That's why it was in self-defense.
Sam?
You know, I'm reminded, I guess we're beating up on North Carolina. I'm reminded of South Park Susan, who approached some people in Charlotte, North Carolina. Two sisters, literally blood sisters, were out having their car serviced in a parking lot, and she comes up and says that she's white and she's beautiful and she was going to pull a gun on them. Now, this was a story that I had to say I don't believe, because I cannot believe that those two sisters didn't cold call her right there on the spot. And there it was on video, the news had it. I think that this was one of those cases of fake news, because I'm just sure that if it had been real, South Park Susan would be dead today.
Guys, let's talk a little politics, and that is, I saw today where Michael Avenatti announced he was not going to be running for president.
Shocking.
You beat him up, man. You beat the man up. What do you expect, Roland?
Well, but I kept trying to tell everybody, all you got to try to take it seriously, he was never going to run for president.
He was never going to run for president.
Absolutely not.
No, he never was.
No. But I tell you what, though, that PR hit he took after he spent that about half hour here with you, that then got picked up by everybody else, that put a dent in his momentum. So, yeah, he was never going to run. But even if he thought he was going to sustain the lie long enough for some publicity, I think his road down, you could look at this as a major stumbling block in him trying to even keep that lie alive.
Well, look, I was trying to explain to him what the comment he made was crazy, didn't make any sense whatsoever. But the idea was running, and I saw one Democrat predict they may have 30 or 40 folks running. I don't believe that's actually going to be the case. I think it's probably going to be anywhere from 12 to 14. I do want to ask each one of you, from an African American perspective, who do you believe who is black will jump into the race? The reason I'm raising this now, remember, Obama announced shortly, I think in February of 2007. So probably after MLK's birthday, we're going to start seeing the announcements roll out of folks forming exploratory committees. And so in about 30 days to 45 days, we're going to see the first announcements of people running for president. Who do you think black is going to be running?
Well, I don't think there's any question that Cory Booker is going to run, and I suspect that Kamala Harris, the senator from...
Oh, no, not suspect, Sam. Kamala Harris been running the moment she got elected.
No question. No question. And you can add Deval Patrick. I think, it'll be interesting because you see Joe Biden saying he's the most qualified person. Flashback to George W. Bush. Clarence Thomas is not on the bench if Joe Biden hadn't helped body Anita Hill and put him there. So Biden needs to be out. But I think what we have now is there's some talk of some Beto O'Rourke combination of O'Rourke with Harris or Booker. Who would be at the top of the ticket, who would be at the bottom. But certainly the three that I named, and then you got some other candidates who may sit this one out, or somebody like even Hakeem Jeffries, a kind of corporate Dem who was able to thwart Barbara Lee, and he's trying to vault into the conversation, maybe at the bottom of the ticket, and that may be a later conversation, but certainly Harris, Booker, and Deval Patrick, and probably, and this will be the last one, I think Eric Holder is probably the strongest of those candidates if he were to throw his hat in the ring, in my opinion.
Can somebody explain to me real quick, when you talk about these folks who are running, and all these media people talk about Beto O'Rourke, why in the hell they tout O'Rourke running and not Abrams or Gillum when they actually lost by a smaller margin than he did?
Well, I think Abrams said today that she was considering running, but she's also considering running in for the governor of Georgia as well as for the Senate seat. So I think her name is going to be on the lips of a lot of people. I think she's a real strong vice presidential candidate. I don't know that her profile is nationally, at this point, as high as some of the other people. Gillum would be, I think, just an ideal candidate to run. He did so well in terms of his image and the way in which he presented himself. I think that he would be a really strong person.
Now, to Gillum, the point on Gillum, he's also a fraternity brother.
Yeah.
So, which is a good thing. I may probably stir some things up, but we, everybody, all these blacks, brothers and sisters want to jump in the race. Do we need that? We need to win, period.
Yes, we do.
We need to get the best candidate to win, whoever and whatever that might be. That's the case.
I think that getting black candidates in will help us win because it will get excitement in the primaries. And I think that if the ultimate person is smart, they'll recognize that getting black candidates energized in the primary and then figuring out the best way to keep them energized through November is a winning strategy. So I would not want to back off on having fewer black candidates in. I would want to see more of them get in.
But
as the movie Passion 57 said, always bet on black. Talking about winning. Speaking of winning, last night the Washington Redskins, they lost not only the game, but they also lost another one of their quarterbacks. And, of course, Mark Sanchez as the backup quarterback, and he looked terrible, in the words of Charles Barkley. So the question is, what's going on with these NFL teams, and they continue to bypass Colin Kaepernick and having quarterbacks who absolutely suck? Joining me right now is Marcellus Wiley, former NFL player. He works for Fox Sports 1, also the author of Never Shut Up. Marcellus, what's up, brother?
In a minute, man. How you been, big dog?
All good, good. Glad to get you. So I was stretching there a little bit. You had to get off the air and hop on, but glad to have you here. So I got to ask you on this Colin Kaepernick deal. And I keep saying this. NFL owners clearly would rather lose and not make the playoffs than sign a quality quarterback like Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah, that's pretty obvious. He certainly, in terms of merit, deserves the opportunity to be in the NFL. In terms of quarterback rating, is better than the options that are available, Mark Sanchez and whoever they may get as a backup. And even in terms of quarterback rating, better than their starter and Alex Smith, who was hurt and injured before. So you look at the situation. I will caution everyone to remember, even before Colin Kaepernick was an NFL player, that the NFL has never been a merit-based exclusive club. It's never been the best 53 guys are on one team. The best 11 guys are starting on offense. There's politics at play, business decisions, PR, community relations, marketing. There's a huge roundtable of circumstances that has always dictated every NFL experience. So I just caution people when they say, hey, he's better than this guy. I've been on many a team in the 90s, pre-Colin Kaepernick, that we didn't always put our best foot forward in terms of personnel, didn't always see the best coaches. Marty Schottenheimer got fired as a 14-2 coach because he didn't get along with his GM. I've seen all kind of craziness happen. So in that light, this doesn't surprise me.
Well, and here's the piece, though. If you're a fan of the Washington team, you should be cussing them out because literally they were a playoff team, and now with losing their top two quarterbacks, they may not make the playoffs, and then they'll just decide. And what's telling is they would sign a Reuben Foster right after he was cut for alleged domestic violence situation and say, nah, brother, the one you kneel, you ain't going to play. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's disheartening if you really want to look at it as a meritocracy, which we look at sports as. And sports, at least in its origins, was where it didn't matter what your likeness was, didn't matter what your size was. Can you ball or not? That's the spirit of sports. We love it, that competition factor. And when you see it get diluted and you see it get marginalized and put in different columns such as, well, what are your political stances? Oh, well, what can we get of value from you? Versus, are you just the best man for the job? I think we all get disinterested when we see this come. And it's happened. It's a reality. And unfortunately, I don't think this situation changed. Colin stays at home, never as an NFL player again.
I got a question for you that I'm going to have each one of my panelists ask you a question. By the way, Marcellus, today is Founders Day for Alpha Phi Alpha. And so I got all alphas on the show today, so just want to let you know that. So, you know.
All alphas?
All alphas in the house.
Oh, there you go. Respect, man. You know, I went to Columbia. We weren't too big on the frat thing, man. So respect to what you're doing.
Got it. So I got to ask you this. So in your book, Never Shut Up, you're not just talking about sports. You're talking about growing up, of course, in Crenshaw. Then you go on to get a degree from Columbia in sociology. And you're talking about a number of different subjects. And so in many ways, when you hear, of course, I guess I won't call it your colleague, when you hear Laura Ingraham on Fox News tell LeBron, shut up and dribble. I mean, look, you've been hearing folks tell athletes for a long time, just shut up and play. But you're making it clear in your book, Never Shut Up, that you got some thoughts on some stuff that don't just involve NFL.
Yeah. I use people who talk from their vantage point and their perspective when it differs from me. I usually use that as fuel in terms of I must be going the right way. Something biblical that my grandmother told me a long time ago is that the gates to heaven are narrow and few come between. So if you ever say something, feel something, do something, and you feel that resistance, you feel that backlash, you hear people trying to silence you, usually that means you're going in the right direction. When you're a part of the flock, when you're just another sheep out there, people usually let you just go by quietly. They pacify it, and their silence is complicit with your behavior. So I've never been fooled by that. When people looked at me and wanted to call me outside my name, outside my character, I never took it in a sensitive state. I took it as an emotional response. And the big difference is internally, I can respect and deal with my emotions, but I can't let you dictate from the outside what I feel emotionally, and that's called sensitivity. So when I hear people say, shut up and dribble, I actually chuckle because I'm like, I must be getting to you because that hit dog is the one that hollers. So not mad at that.
First question, Sam Foley.
Would you have a kid of yours play football given the dangers and the challenges that you see now in the game?
I wouldn't let my son play until he reaches high school level. If he sits down with me and has a candid conversation about the rigors of football and decides that's what he wants to do with his life, pursue it as a goal in his life, I would allow him to play at that point, but not before high school and not if it's not an end goal. Like he has to have an NFL aspiration or a collegiate scholarship aspiration. If he's just doing it for hobby, for fun, just to be on the team, be with his buddies, hell no. If you're really trying to get something out this game, okay, because the risk is not worth the reward.
Long Wall.
Let's go back to Colin Kaepernick. I mean, there's been a lot of talk. I mean, do you feel this is actually a conspiracy to keep him out of it? I know it seems obvious, but what are your thoughts about that, having been in the game?
Yeah, collusion.
Well, the collusion is difficult to prove, one, because what if everyone is of like minds, but they're not sharing that information? Right. That's not collusion, but that's still of like mind. Look, the good and bad, there's pros and cons to the Colin Kaepernick situation. I have to be frank. I have to be fair-minded. Colin Kaepernick comes in. If he's on your team, he deserves to be on your team. He's a better player than a lot of these backups and some of these starters. The issue is, let's not forget that every single owner is the owner for economic reasons. That's right, This is their hobby. They have made millions and billions doing something else. What's that passion? That's their passion. Then after they made that money, they use those returns to just say, let me buy a team and have some fun. This is an economic package that will be disturbed if Colin Kaepernick was a part of it. Now, if I were an owner, I would take the initiative and say, you know what? I think Colin Kaepernick's good for my team and he's good for business. You just got to go through the initial shock and the initial noise that may come. But I can't tell someone how to run something. The beauty of owning my home is that when you come to my house, I can tell you, take your shoes off. And you can say, I'm not taking my shoes off. And I can say, well, I see you in the streets because you're not coming in. I hate to be that black and white about this, But those are 32 people who have ownership responsibilities. I think one message I take from it is that we need more ownership that reflects our mindset, our likeness, and our operations in terms of day-to-day execution. That's the message I take from it. We need to own more.
Last question, Greg Carr.
Thanks, Brother Roland. Brother Wiley, it's good to talk to you, brother. Since your book describes you, and accurately, I think, as a gentleman scholar, and since you went to Columbia, the home, at least a graduate of Columbia Law School, being an All-American football player by the name of Paul Robeson, who went there for law school, I noticed on Saturday, taking a little bit of a different direction, I noticed on Saturday that the Columbia Board of Trustees, and shout out to my good friend Farrah Griffin, who chairs this new department, has voted on Saturday to create a new Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies. Now, you were a social scientist at Columbia. What's that new department going to mean at Columbia for young people who go to Columbia these days?
Well, Columbia is a very liberal school, and obviously it's in the melting pot of New York City. So I don't think you could be more open-minded than not only the curriculum, but the locale of Columbia. So I think it really goes in alignment to where Columbia is a breeding ground for all who aspire to be different. The beauty of going to Columbia for me was, one, that I was presumed intelligent by going to Columbia. So no one checks your GPA once you're a Columbia grad. No one wants to hear what courses you took. They just realize that, hey, you've been through the academic breeding ground of something that is great. And I respect it for what it is. I think they've always been, in terms of curriculum, in terms of education, in terms of pushing the envelope at the forefront, largely based because it is in New York City. So Enlightenment Central is what Columbia is, and I've always had respect for that education.
Appreciate you, brother.
All right, then. Well, of course, they can catch you on Fox Sports 1 debating Jason Whitlock every day. Lord, we got to pray for you on that one, Marcellus.
Jesus, you ain't lying.
I certainly appreciate it. Again, the book is called Never Shut Up. Marcellus Wiley. Folks, be sure to get it. Always good to chat with you, brother.
My man. Appreciate you guys. Take care, brothers.
Yes, thanks.
All right, thanks a bunch. All right, I want to thank, of course, my group of alphas today. Of course, Greg Carr, Sam Fullwood, Line Walls on Founders Day for Alpha Phi Alpha. Glad to see you brothers here. Also want to thank Congressman Bobby Scott for being on the show, a fellow brother, and of course, Fred McClure, the son of an alpha. So Fred, way to sneak that one in terms of on there as well. So we thank you as much. Folks, don't forget you can support Roland Martin Unfiltered by watching us on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Roland S. Martin. We've got some phenomenal things lined up for you in 2019, but we also need you to support the show, and that is to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every single dollar that you commit goes to this show, to making this possible, and so we certainly appreciate that. And so go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com, and our goal is to add 1,000 new members of our fan club by the end of this month, so we can really get geared up and focused in 2019. I'll be broadcasting tomorrow from the Porter Center for Media Studies here in St. Petersburg. Well, I'll be speaking to them tomorrow, so we look forward to joining you. Thanks a bunch, folks. You have an absolutely great evening. I got to go. 06!
06!